this evening. I hope you're all doing very well. This isn't going to be your typical ASMR video. Not a typical roleplay or a tapping video. This is going to be a creepy story video. Now, these stories are supposedly real life stories. Stories that have happened to real life people. Which makes them that little bit extra creepy, I think. But hopefully, you experience ASMR at the same time as getting a bit creeped out. Or maybe you're just creeped out. Who knows? I hope you enjoy. This first story is called This is Maria. My husband and I live in a small, unincorporated town on the outskirts of a bigger city. Although we are almost 50 years old, we are 30 to 40 years younger than any of our near neighbours. Most of them have grandchildren who visit regularly and drive them wherever they need to go. Not so for the man I usually just called Professor. His wife Elena died 12 years ago. I only knew her briefly, but she and the Professor were one of those life goals kind of couples. I loved spending time with them. They were both so witty and clearly still deeply in love. Elena's passing hit her husband hard. For the last year he had been battling cancer, with no bus service in our rural area, and cabs from town too expensive. I ended up driving him to the doctors. The Professor had been in the US since his early 20s, but he still had a remaining foreign accent. Usually when he'd phone me, he would say, "Good afternoon," "Oi," as he pronounced my name. Sometimes he would call in the wee hours, in pain, only able to gasp my name. "One, one." I would drop the phone and run to his house to help him with his medication, or take him to the city's emergency room. He was adamant about not staying away from home. He knew the end was near, and he wanted to go in his own bed. On October the 1st, at almost 4 a.m, my cell phone rang, showing the Professor's number. When I answered, a strange voice asked, "Orne?" "Yes," I answered. "Professor?" "No," the voice giggled. "This is Maria. I'm taking him tonight." Then I woke up. I was sitting in bed with the phone in my hand. My husband and our dog were sleeping soundly, so the phone hadn't really rung. Or had it? I started to call with the Professor, but if he was managing to get some sleep, I didn't want to disturb him, so I got up and dressed quietly, and the dog and I slipped out to the backyard. I could see the Professor's house from there. No lights were on, and everything was quiet. I wasn't comfortable, though, so I went ahead and dialed. 25 rings and no answer. Damn. I knew then. I went back in and woke my partner. We walked to the house and knocked. Nothing. We had to phone the sheriffs. They broke in. The Professor had died, seemingly peaceful in his bed. Because of our unincorporated location, any of the chores which would fall to professionals in an urban area are taken up by neighbours here. So that evening, with the deputy's supervision, the families on our block began to sort through the Professor's papers. We needed the deed to his burial plot and any kind of will or link to distant relations. I looked through a small scrapbook of old photos that was on his nightstand. There was no cousin Marco from the old country or nephew Bob. It was mostly pictures of Elena, the voice that I heard on the phone, and the Professor. And in that book, they never spoke of a young daughter Maria, because she had died in 1971. That's quite a creepy story, I have to say. I'm getting quite creeped out doing this, I'll be honest. I don't know what drove me to do this. I really wanted to, but now I'm sort of regretting doing it. But pretty horrible story, but it's creepy nonetheless. So, this one's called When the Spring Came. My good friend, let's call her Jane to protect her identity, told me her ghost story last year, and since then it's been confirmed to me by several people who were around at the time. It took place back in the late 90s when she was in her early 20s. I've got to look over my shoulder. Jane was living on a farm in a very rural area with some other folk around her age, because they were trying a back to the land type situation after college. Most of their neighbours were really friendly and helpful. Lots of old ladies making food for them, and former co-worker guys who would help around the farm. There was one neighbour in particular named Jim, who was known to be a former meth addict. He was cleaned up and acted as a sort of paid handyman around the farm. The farm was really old, including the main house, which was built in the early 1900s. Each of the people who lived there had their own room, including Jane, who took the room closest to the front door of the house. Eventually, one of the neighbours told Jane and her friends that the house was rumoured to be haunted by a ghost of a man who lived there in the 1930s. Jane and her friends never really took it seriously, but they would joke around and try and scare each other in a pranking way. One night, though, Jane woke because she could feel the presence of something unusual in her room. She opened her eyes and could see a dark, ghostly figure standing silently in the doorway, staring at her. She repeatedly told the figure to leave, saying, "You need to go now, I do not want you here." Eventually, after a few minutes, the figure left. She didn't tell any of her friends because she didn't want to freak them out or for them to think she was crazy. A few days later, one of the other women who lived in the house told Jane that the ghost had appeared at her doorway and had come in her room, but she laid in her bed silently in response. Jane then confessed the same thing happened to her earlier, except the ghost left when she told it to leave. The ghost continued to appear to Jane occasionally, but she would tell him to leave and he would. That autumn, they had to stop paying Jim the handyman because they were running out of funds and they couldn't afford to have him around. Angry, he turned on the farm people and started doing terrible things to the farm, including vandalising the barn, messing up the garden. They never had proof it was him, so the police couldn't really do anything, but they were convinced that he was the one doing it. One horrible morning in the middle of winter, Jane came outside and saw the farm dog was hanging from a tree. They all assumed it was Jim who had done it, and they called up the police. But Jim wasn't in his trailer up in the hollow. It looked like he had skipped town. When spring came, the snow started melting and one of the neighbours found Jim's body in a creek that had been covered in snow for a while. The police investigated and surmised that Jim had been high on drugs, fallen into the creek, hit his head, and froze to death. He died around the same time the dog was killed. The creepiest part of the whole thing was that Jane realised that the ghost had stopped appearing to her around the time that Jim went missing, but she didn't put two and two together until they found his body. Now she's told me that she's pretty sure it was Jim standing in her doorway, silently at night. And that is so much creepier than just a ghost. Are you feeling it? I don't know why I put myself through this. Oh, it's horrible. Pretty horrible story. Okay, so I think we've got time for one more. Now the first two are kind of you ghost, like haunting stories. This one is just involving just people, and to begin with, you might find it quite comical. But when you actually get down to it, this is probably the worst. It definitely seems the most real anyway, in the kind of story that would happen in a modern day setting. Because it involves the app Grindr, which is, for those of you who don't know, almost like the gay version of Tinder. So it's like a gay hookup app, to some anyway. That's what it's used for in this story. I know, you think, how can that be creepy? It can't, can it? You know, what's the worst that could happen? It was a bad hookup. No, but it's pretty bad. So, here goes nothing. I've only told this story to my closest friends. I haven't even confided in my sister for fear of obvious shame. I went to college in Chicago, which has a large gay community. Now, gay men are true champions of leveraging technology to their sexual powers. Grindr was on the map as the go-to hookup app years before the straights got tizzy about Tinder. I normally used Grindr to expedite getting my rocks off, but I was having an off week and decided to use a platform that's more to the point. Craigslist. Sorry, correction. It starts off about Grindr, but it's actually about Craigslist. I posted a listing looking for a hookup with a good-looking, slightly older man, and within a few hours, I settled on a fit 30-year-old someone. This was a Friday night, and he agreed to pick me up at my apartment building. Then he would take me back to his place, and we'd fool around. He picks me up at my nearest intersection. He's just as attractive as his picture, but yet something is off, personality-wise, with him. He wasn't off in a slow or stupid way. In fact, it was the total opposite. He was incredibly nice. His voice was kind of light, and there was something too well practiced about it. In retrospect, the more I think about it, the more it feels rehearsed, calculated, like a razor blade hiding in a popsicle. He asked me a little about myself, but then he didn't respond when I asked him the same questions. He'd just smile and laugh it off. What I did manage to get out of him was that he worked in real estate. He told me earlier through email that he lived between two streets, X and Y Street. I wrote this off as a blip because the streets ran parallel, and he essentially told me that he lived in the middle of the road. We were in his car for about 8 minutes, and we'd already passed these streets by a few blocks. I lived in a popular walkable area, and at this moment I told myself, you can get out of the car now. You can make a break for it. You can run home. You're still close enough. But I ignored my gut. I told myself that I was overanalyzing this. We'll get to his place after a 35-minute car ride. We're out of the city and in a neighbourhood. Right away, his house is clean. But again, it's too clean. Everything was so polished, nothing out of place. There was a Dexter level of cleanness to it. We go to the kitchen, which was in the back of the house, and after a minute or two of awkward conversation, I wrap my hands around him and kiss him. Except, he doesn't receive the kiss. My lips make contact with his, but his lips remain flat and at rest. There is a moment of pause and he smiles against my kiss. This wasn't a very friendly smile. This was a knowing smirk. He tells me this is his first time and he's very, very nervous. He excuses himself and runs down to the basement. The stairs are next to the kitchen. They are not a straight staircase and they turn at a right angle halfway down, which prevents me from seeing what's downstairs. He's down there for a good 5-10 minutes. I hear stuff rustling around, metal things clanking together. yell down for him to get back up. The sound stops. No reply. It starts again. I run to the bathroom and lock the door. I think about jumping out of the window. I text a friend. He tells me to get out, but I don't want to offend my host. There's a knock on the bathroom door. And he says for me to meet him in the bedroom. The kitchen is next to the bathroom. I consider pocketing a kitchen knife. He comes back up and we finally stop fooling around. He won't kiss, and he keeps telling me that this is his first time doing this. The weird thing is that he's oddly comfortable with my body, and he's actually quite good at gay stuff. He gets very aggressive at one point. I look around the room and spotted a blue glass vase. I tell myself that I can use this as a weapon if needed. He stops before the end. However, I ask if I may finish on him. It's what's written down, people. I'm sorry. He agrees. He freaks out after I do. He gets up without saying a word, and completely naked, he walks back down to the basement. I put on my underwear and walk to the edge of the stairs. I hear whimpers and more whimpers. There is no one downstairs except for him, of this I'm sure. The clanking metal sounds continue. They're nothing loud. They're like a scalpel being placed on a metal surgery tray, or tools bouncing around in a toolbox. He's downstairs for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes now. I'm fully dressed. I'm giving my friend a play-by-play through text, and he tells me to drop him a pin. I don't know how to, so he walks me through the process. When I finally do send me his location, he calls me. You have to get out of the house, now. Why, I ask. Do you know where you are? You're out by O'Hare. My fight or flight completely kicks in. Now I'm understanding I'm stranded in an area that has no access to public transportation, and I don't have a car. I'll yell downstairs to see if he's all right. All sounds stop. No reply. For a moment, I'm thinking about grabbing his keys from his jacket, driving his car a few blocks from my place, and leaving it wherever. At this point, I yell down, I'll be waiting outside. I hear what sounded like chains dropping and footsteps coming heavily up the stairs. I run to the door, fumbling with the lock, until I rip it open and get outside. He was naked last time I saw him, so I figure getting dressed will at least slow him down. I freeze for a moment, and then took off running. I made it 2 blocks away before I broke down crying and called an Uber. This was February in Chicago, and it was maybe 22 degrees outside and snowy. At this point, he tries calling me, and I hang up. He texts me, haha, where'd you go? I say that I got a ride and I'm okay. I block his number. I hid between 2 cars and a used car lot while waiting 30 minutes for an Uber to pick me up. I saw his car driving around. 2 Ubers had already cancelled on me. I had to call the third Uber and made him promise that he wouldn't cancel on me because I was in danger. The car kept driving around. I could see it, but he couldn't see me. I block out this experience. There are some nights where I begin to go over all of the details in my head. It destroys me and turns my blood cold. And it's the little red flags that deeply unnerve me. I'm convinced that we were in a model home. It just seemed too perfect. Finally, the Uber came and picked me up and took me away. The driver asked how my night was, but I didn't respond. I was still in shock from the events that had just taken place, and I was playing them out in my head, like a horror film. One thing I did know was that he was gay and comfortable with himself, but I believe he was referring to something far more sinister when he was trying to say that this was his first time The smartest thing I did, among many foolish choices, was not going down to that basement. I do not want to think about what would have happened. There's a moment in the end of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo where a man goes up to the killer in his house, knowing by now that he is the serial killer. And the killer says something along the lines of, "You knew, but you still came inside. We were too afraid to be rude to go out without animal instinct and get away from danger." I experienced this firsthand. I always think back to the story that was submitted to me last year about a man who was almost killed by John Wayne Gacy at a hotel as a teenager. He says that one day he saw Gacy's fact on the TV after being caught, and he had a total breakdown, knowing what almost became of him. Something deep inside tells me that I may have a moment like this myself one day. So there we have it, guys. So which did you find the most creepy? I don't know why, but I think that one, because I mean, I do believe in ghosts and that kind of thing, but some people are very skeptical, and not everyone believes in that kind of stuff, whereas that last one, it could happen to anybody. Anybody, regardless of age, sexuality, and it does happen. That's the scary thing, it does happen to people. So all I say is, stay safe out there. I didn't mean for this to be a depressing video. I just wanted to change up my content of videos. I mean, the first two were quite, like happy videos. Whereas this one, I wanted to change it up a bit. I hope it didn't freak anyone out. Very much appreciate if this did entertain you, or get you in some way, whether it be ASMR or creep you out a bit. If you would subscribe or comment or like, all three, if you're feeling, like you want to, then that'd be very much appreciated. Thank you very much for watching. I didn't expect the video to go on this long. And if you've got any requests, I would love to hear them. Anything that I could do better or I did well, I would love to hear that as well. So, thank you very much, everybody. And I'll be seeing you all very soon.